back to another Latitude live stream. I'm Devin, VP of Experience at Latitude. I'm joined with our CEO, Nick Walton. We're excited to have everybody on the stream today. We're going to be talking a little bit about product pillars, which may be a topic that is new to some of you. It's certainly something that we've spent a lot more time recently thinking about, so we're excited to share it with you. Before we get in, we do need to make sure that we're doing a murder shed weapon review to kick things off. And today we have something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. I present to you a weapon by different names depending on which part of the world you live in. Some call it flip-flop in Hawaii, they call it a slipper, jandals in kind of the South Pacific.
La Chancla.
Chancla, there you go. But in many parts of the world, these are deadly weapons when yielded by the right angry, often maternal leader of a family. They have just the right heft for a good toss through the air, and what's nice is they're sold in pairs, so if you lose one, you've got a backup. So we keep the murder shed stocked with those, as well as some of our other tools. So hope you all enjoy. Maybe you can collect one of those for your own murder shed at some point. Let's get into product positioning. So product positioning. So we'll kind of cover a couple things. So first, we'll talk about like what product positioning is, why it's important, and then we'll get into the product positioning that we've been thinking about here at Latitude as it applies to both AI Dungeon and Voyage. And I think as we go through the product positioning, you'll hear some things that we've talked about before. We're likely going to be talking about these again in other streams. You're going to hear us talking about this over and over and over again. So it felt like a really good time for us to talk about why we believe in product pillars, why we think they're important to any company who's trying to build something great. So let's talk about first what a product pillar is. And I thought I'd start off with a tweet that Nick actually shared a while ago from Jeff Bezos, talking about product pillars for Amazon. So let me share my screen, and I think we have audio working this time. We didn't last time. We're slowly getting better at this live stream stuff. Let me screen share, and let's listen to Mr. Bezos.
A world that's rapidly changing, and because of AI and all the technologies we have and the dynamism in the world, so many things are changing, and they're changing so rapidly. So if you think long term, it forces you to think, what are the points of stability? What is not going to change? And one of the things that changes very slowly is customer needs. And so you can build a strategy around customer needs that will have durability. It will be durable in time. So an example, Amazon is that customers like fast deliveries. And so you would never expect 10 years from now, it would be impossible to imagine a customer saying, I love Amazon, I just wish you delivered a little more slowly. Or I love Amazon, I just wish your prices were a little higher. Or at Blue Origin, I love your rockets, but I just wish they were a little less reliable. And so these ideas, these big ideas that are customer based, they start with the customer. It's an idea that is in the customer's brain. Those are the ones, because human nature doesn't change rapidly. And so what we as customers want tends to change slowly. And if you base your energies and direction and strategies and tactics, everything that makes a company effective around those customer needs, then you can change the details, how you get there all the time, because the world is changing so rapidly. The technologies will change, your competitive set will change, everything will change except those needs. And so that's another way that long-term thinking is protective, because it forces you to think about the real customer needs, to center those as your big ideas, and then put energy into them in 100 ways, and to be very dynamic. I always say be stubborn on the vision and flexible on the details. And you have to be, because the world is changing and you change your mind. I've noticed that people who are right a lot change their mind a lot. People who are wrong a lot are very stubborn on the details.
All right, awesome. So, uh, Nick, I'm going to put you on the spot. I mean, you were the one that shared this with us originally. Like, why did that kind of tweet from Bezos stand out to you, if you remember?
Yeah, I think there. So when you think about long term and doing a company, there are a lot of things different people can focus on, right? Like you can focus on metrics and like growing revenue. And so you see this with like big Wall Street companies. They're like, we're just going to focus on growing our revenue a ton. You can focus on your competitors. You can say, oh, we're going to constantly try and like compete with them. But I think the problem with some of those approaches is they are so finicky and change so much, and they don't really tell you necessarily how to achieve greatness. They only tell you how to either be as good as someone else or close to, um, or how to achieve a metric that may help in the short term but not the long term. But I think the real powerful thing is when you focus not on just trying to compete, not just on a metric, but on a fundamental human desire and need. Because we as humans haven't actually changed in thousands of years. Like we're still the same, biological beings that our great, 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 great grandparents were. And we have the same things that we value and care about. And so if you understand those and what's really at the core of what people care about, then you can build products that deliver on those and have perfect clarity in how to continue to improve how they deliver on those over years and years and years, right? You don't have to sit there and wonder like, gee, I don't know how we're going to drive value next year. If you have really clear, really strong clarity into what value you're driving fundamentally, then you can understand exactly what you need to do to deliver more value to users and then to grow as a company as you do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And like, that's what I love about this quote too from Bezos is like, if you're trying to take a long term perspective in building a business, building something enduring, you need a goal and a vision that is stable, that you can count on. And so I love that. So why do you have product pillars? One of them is that you're describing customer needs. Like if we were to come, well, maybe just kind of write down Amazon's, and we're trying something new here with a little like right on the iPad thing, and y'all can tell us if we like this or not. Um, but their product pillars were low prices, fast selection, and fast shipping. And what's interesting about that is like if you look at any of those kind of in isolation, there's other companies that focus on low prices. There are other companies that focus on vast selection. There's other companies that focus on fast shipping too, but nobody does it to the way that Amazon does. Like they pursue each of those three categories with an energy and ambition that frankly the world hadn't seen prior to Amazon, right? I mean, they got their start selling used books, and they were finding obscure titles that you couldn't find in a local bookstore, and that vast selection angle was a big part of their early days of being successful. But it's expanded to like even today, part of their vast selection comes because they've innovated and brought in the marketplace concept to Amazon. So it's not just Amazon selling goods; they have other sellers who are also selling, and that also drives down the low prices. When it comes to fast shipping, Amazon has invested in last mile delivery. They're working on drones. They're working with other kind of delivery companies. They pioneered the Prime shipping, free 2-day shipping. They've literally sort of changed customer expectations of what it means to buy online and how quickly customers expect to get it. That used to be a barrier for people shopping online. It no longer is. And a lot of places in the world now, you even have same day delivery for certain things. So that this is like, it's very telling for Amazon to have this clarity of purpose and vision that guides everything that they're going to do into the future, and you can see the way that you can see that footprint in all the stuff that they work on even now. So and that kind of leads into point number 2 for the product pillars, is these can't be completed. Oh, did I spell that right? Yep. Okay, we're about to find out if I can spell without the spell checker. So like, coming back to those Amazon ones, Jeff Bezos even talked about this in the tweet. He said like they can't, like there's never gonna be a point where shipping is too fast. There's never gonna be a point where the prices are too low. There's never a point where they're gonna have too many products available on their platform. Like these are things that they can be pursued indefinitely. And that's part of why these product pillars are so stable, is because customer values are not ever going to change, right? Like they allow a team or a company to pursue a vision that is consistent no matter what happens. So that's an important part of these pillars as well. So let's talk about a third point. And that is, this is not meant for marketing. So sometimes companies talk about things like product differentiation or product messaging, or even just kind of like way that you frame your product. And those things are important, but that's not what a product pillar actually is. This is about defining, the decisions that you make as a product, and the things that you're saying yes to and the things that you're saying no to. Marketing is more externally focused, and product positioning is actually more internally focused. And that actually kind of leads into one of the comments here that I see on the thing about disagreeing with too many products, because this is actually a really important point. Product pillars are actually opinionated, and they allow companies to define what they are pursuing or what they're not pursuing. You're right that for Amazon, they are pursuing a product that has many products, and that might not be the right thing for all companies pursue. But you can't be all things to all people. You have to pick a market. You have to pick something to go off of. And so a lot of times when you're defining these product pillars, you're actually defining what you're not pursuing as well. So if you think about like IKEA, for instance, they focus on affordable, self-assembled furniture, but they're not trying to be high luxury. They're not trying to be the most convenient. In fact, I think for a long time, even today, I don't think you could even order many of their products online. You have to go into the store. So they're focusing their entire sort of supply chain around low prices, and they're not even building the furniture for you. They make you do that, but it saves you money, right? Apple's one of their product pillars is having sort of like fully integrated products where they own kind of the cloud computing all the way down to the hardware, and that is a sacrifice. And it's also premium. They're also making premium products, and that means that they're giving up configurability, they're giving up low prices in some points, but those are trade-offs that they're making. So these product pillars help to define where you're going as a company, and also the types of things that you're building. And so the last thing is, and Nick talked about this a little bit. This is not meant to it's not competitive. Meaning these are things that are focused on customers, or in our case, players or users. That we're not creating these product pillars in order to define, like trying to shut down somebody in a different kind of competing market. Like this is about how do we deliver the most value to our users and to our players, and not worry so much about other things. So let's so this is sort of the framework for like why product pillars exist. Now let's shift a little bit to talk about the product pillars that we've decided to kind of focus on for Latitude, and get into some of those in more detail. And And let me kind of shift over here now to, we'll find a new little spot that hasn't been written here. We'll get into it. And Nick, I don't know if you want to be the one that kind of introduces the pillars while I'm writing down, but let's we can get into that.
Yeah, let's do it. So, as we spent a lot of time thinking and trying to make sure we understood how can we capture in words the fundamental like values of what we're building, and how can we do it in a way that both captures what we love about AI Dungeon and what I think is going to make Voyage magical in a way that is different from what already exists out there. And we came with three pillars that we think really capture the fundamentals of what's really compelling with this. And the first we call story immersion. So human beings have story is part of being human and has been for thousands of years, right? Like people have told stories around the campfire. They've told stories in books and in podcasts and in movies and in games. And storytelling is a very fundamental human thing. And I think one of the things we really try to enable is the ability of people to immerse themselves in a story and a world, right? And we really like this word immersion because I think it captures a lot of what really matters and how we can improve our product, right? And the way I like to talk about this feeling is my favorite way to describe it is it's that feeling of like, you know, being a kid and reading a book and being like having your flashlight under the covers and just being so gripped in the story that you can't get out because you're in another world, right? It's this ability to be transported out of your everyday life and be in another world, another story, and to feel fully in it. I think that's a very magical thing, and that's one of the things we really try to enable. And so there are a bunch of things that go into immersive story, and both AI Dungeon and Voyage, it's a really critical element. So, immersive story, like what is a story? Stories are built on especially great characters. So that's one of the things we have to pay a lot of attention to AI Dungeon and in Voyage. So in AI Dungeon, a lot of what drives great characters is the ability to create things like story cards and define your characters, as well as AI models that can really bring those characters to life, right? Characters that feel believable, that feel interesting, that feel like they're driving the story in compelling directions. And you even see this with, platforms like Character AI or Chai or other chatbots. It's all about just talking with a character, right? So like I think characters drive interesting stories. And in Voyage as well. So one of the cool things about Voyage is we've done a ton to make the characters way more interesting than we could before. So instead of just being represented in the story, characters in Voyage, they have their own image that reflects who they are. They have their own hidden backstory that may not be apparent to you. They take independent actions from you, right? So they're not just, they're not just characters that revolve around you. There's a story around a world where you are one of the characters, but there's other characters too, and they sort of live independently of you. And so like I think characters are one of those things that make the world more immersive. So you can start to see how we can improve the experience, right? Like we can make characters more believable, more interesting, more compelling, where you feel I love this comment, right? Where it's like I fell in love with a character and was kind of shocked with myself. And that's my experience too. Like some of my most meaningful moments on AI Dungeon and Voyage are when I interact with a character and got so like connected to them that I was just like, wow, like I feel like I'm having this whole experience. In Voyage, characters can die, and that's really like it's really sad and emotional, but it also makes everything that happens with the character that much more meaningful, right? Like you go on an adventure and barely escaping a dangerous situation with your companion like feels so much more meaningful because they could have died, right? It's like there are stakes, there are consequences, and so that makes the time you spend and the adventures you go on that much more meaningful. So character is one. Another is a world, right? Characters, are interesting because they're interacting in some world. And so on AI Dungeon, we let you create scenarios and story cards that create, lore around what is this world you're in. And in Voyage, we take that, 10 steps farther where we say, okay, now you're not just defining some lore elements. You can define regions and locations, and you can, you know, create an entire world that has different mechanics and magic systems, or whatever you want, and that's consistent. You can leave a location and come back 1,000 turns later. It gives you a much deeper sense of, I'm in a living world that exists independent of me, right? And then there's another element of a story, which is just like being able to be immersed and not taken out of that. So, you know, that comes down to, how do we do monetization? How do we do, you know, registration? Bugs and cliches and repetitiveness are all things that we try and reduce. And we hear lots of feedback around users because it breaks immersion, right? And memory is this way too, right? Like, you watch a movie, and if someone does something that doesn't make sense, it immediately breaks immersion. You're like, wait, but that doesn't make sense. Why would they do that when, like, it would make way more sense to do this? Because now you've broken this you know, this ability to feel like you're in another world, because something came up that reminded you that actually you're in a fictional thing, and you're not actually in another world. And that breaks the magic and fun, right? So it's really important to have to try and reduce and get rid of those moments that break the immersion that you feel in a world, right?
Yeah, it might even be
Go
interesting for
ahead.
us to talk through, like, because I think, like, as we think about the history of AI Dungeon and kind of how we've sort of like learned this principle, there's been times where we've seen this manifest over and over and over again. So, like, an example that I remember, and this is back before we had all these new models that we have now, but one of the common complaints we get from people is that the AI would always forget their name or their gender. Back then, though, I think a lot of the models we were offering were like 1K context, I think at max. Like, there was really, really limited. Um, so, you know, as new models came out that had longer context lengths available, that was one of the things that were really, really interesting in offering players, because we knew that if people could extend their context, we knew that that would allow the AI to remember more of the story, and would have fewer of those immersion breaking moments that you just talked about, Nick, where the AI kind of forgets part of the story. Because to your point, it kind of pulls you out of that experience, and it just makes it less fun and less interesting. Um, and to your point on mechanics, like, even recently we did an experiment with our login flow, and this is kind of a silly example, but we previously we have had this flow that for anonymous users, when you're going through and playing AI Dungeon, after a certain amount of actions, we would interrupt the game and say, "Hey, are you loving AI Dungeon? Why don't you create an account and save what you're doing?" And we, you know, kind of, you know, that actually follows best practice for a lot of like tech things that suggest that, you know, to improve the number of people that are registering for your site, you want to prompt for that early on. But as we understand this principle of immersion, we actually went against the best practice, and we said, actually, let's take the big pop-up out and just let people play, let them have the story. And then when they're at a moment where they're ready to start exploring other things, and they exit, you know, back to the home screen, or they go to change a setting, then we can invite them to register, because they're already kind of like, they've already kind of taken themselves out of the story. We don't want to disrupt the immersion. And we actually saw our our registration metrics actually go up as a result of not disrupting immersion. So it's fascinating how, like, both from like a very kind of core fundamental technology perspective of AI models and context length, which I think are more clear, but even to like the way that we implement our registration, like all of these things we have to pay attention to make sure that we are maintaining this immersive story experience end to end. Um, I'm trying to think like if there's other interesting examples we could share here for immersion that would be interesting for our community.
There's a lot that goes into, so we talked about immersion, but you could also just talk about story, right, as
True.
well. So I think, and they're deeply interconnected. So in Voyage, you know, there's a comment here: will NPCs be more live? Like, do they do more in the background without having to tell the AI to make an NPC do something? And that is something that happens in Voyage. So I've
Yeah.
had a lot of moments where, like, an AI will do an NPC will do something themselves, like independent from any action I took, that just completely surprised me. So a great example is that made me really feel immersed in the world is, there was one time I was playing where I started in this tavern, and, you know, first thing that happens, these thugs burst in the door and they go up to this like ship captain and they're like, you need to give us. He's like, you haven't made your payments, and and then the bartender comes up with her own sword, and like, there's clear this confrontation, and it's a setup for me to like interact with it. And I was just like, nah, I'm not gonna interact. I just walk out of the tavern. I'm like, not my problem. So I walk down the street and I can hear like a scuffle break out, and they start fighting. And I leave and I go to this like baker's shop, and I'm just chilling in the baker's shop, looking around, seeing what there is. And then suddenly these guards run past. And these guards are like, there's been a crime committed at the Drunken Sailor Inn. Someone's been murdered. And the character murdered was the thug leader because the bartender had killed him. And this wasn't just the AI like saying some story to sort of like feed that in. Actually, there were character objects. Those characters fought against each other, and one of them died, and it registered a crime, and then that crime triggered the guards to come like run. So like there's this whole like set of systems that make the world actually feel alive. And this is another principle of immersive story is that we call emergence. And this is one of our, I think the secret sauce of what we do relative to just an AI is have a story that the most interesting stories, I think, are not things that the AI will tell by itself, but actually arise out of the emergent interaction of many complex systems. So this is like if any of you are familiar with Dwarf Fortress or RimWorld, right? So both those games take advantage of this, where you have a bunch of systems that all work together and interact in complex and surprising ways. And out of it arises like these stories that you never would have expected that surprise you, but in ways that feel that don't break immersion, but they feel so realistic that it makes the world feel real, right? So I think the classic Dwarf Fortress example is like there's so much simulation that like a dwarf spills some alcohol on the floor, a cat steps in the alcohol, now there's alcohol on the cat's paw, the cat licks the paw, then the cat gets drunk, and then the cat like went and did a bunch of like crazy things, and it became this whole story, right? And so that's what we are building out in Voyage, is enabling that emergence in a way that I think AI Dungeon has some of. So I think in AI Dungeon, the emergence comes from the interaction between the player and the storyteller. That's where the interesting story comes from, is the player being like, well, what if this happens now? And then the AI does something. And then like those ping pong off each other to make an interesting story that's more interesting than if you just say, tell the AI to write you a 10-page, a story on something. So anyways, emergence I think is another really important principle that we leverage to make the story much more immersive.
Yeah. And I think our community can expect to hear a lot more from us about story and an immersive story, because it's something that we think a lot about. I mean, there's not a lot of companies that have, we have someone on staff whose title is narrative designer, right? And we're thinking deeply about systems that create great story. Emergent story is a great example of that. Kind of this non-linear storytelling, which is very different from other mediums, is something that we talked about in a previous live stream as well. So, this is core to everything that we do, and really kind of the first thing we have to get right with AI Dungeon and Voyage. One other comment I'll make on this is that we talked about how sometimes these pillars, not only do they tell us the things that we are going to build, they also tell us the things that we're not going to build. So one of my favorite questions is when people ask, like, when are you going to do more images in AI Dungeon, or when is there going to be 3D models or world models, or whether that's AI Dungeon or Voyage, like when are we adding all these kind of cool graphics and things? And I love telling people that we're not doing those things until we get the story right. Because like if you look at like, I'm going to pick on like Hollywood or some of these like big blockbuster films, many of them have like fantastic special effects or great actors, and maybe even like funny dialogue and comedy maybe, but the story might be a bit weak, and so the fan base kind of rejects it, and they don't do as well, right? Like story has to be the foundation, and like that's something that we believe in deeply on the products that we're building. Is we may add those things in later, but it's going to start with story first, and those other things just are sort of the icing on the cake that make it even more immersive, right? Because like there's a world where it's like, if we have a 3D world that you can explore, that does add to the immersiveness. Like our visual sense is one of the senses that can help add to immersion, but if it can also easily break immersion, which is a problem. So I think as we explore those things, it'll be under the flag of, does it make the experience more immersive? Should we move on to the second pillar, Nick?
Yeah, let's go into the second pillar. So the second pillar is creative freedom, is how we bucket it. And it's a couple things that go into that. So one of the things that we think is really amazing that AI lets happen, and this goes back to the root of why when I was first playing with GPT-2, I realized there's something really cool here that I was excited about, is the ability to do things that the developer hadn't pre-imagined, right? Because that's every other game. Every other game is, okay, I can select option A, B, or C, but like, what if I want to do something else, right? That is what, that is why I think AI enables a type of experience that was never possible before, and that becomes so compelling. So I think the one place where you have this kind of creative freedom that people love is in D&D, right? And obviously that's a big inspiration for us, because in D&D, because you have a dungeon master who's smart enough to say, okay, well, if you do this, then this is what happens. You have an infinite action space, right? You can do anything, and that is so cool, right? That empowers you to play a role in having your story, the experience you want, to really be someone else. Like, you don't have to just kind of like walk in the shoes of some pre-made developer path. You get to actually like make a story and be someone else in a way that, I think is just so magical. And so I think that's piece one of creative freedom, the ability to define your own character, be who you want to be, the ability to choose your own path, do what you want to do. And then I think the third piece that's important is to then have those actions have consequences. Because if your actions don't have consequences, if the world doesn't react to your choices, they're not actually real choices, right? So there are games where it's like you pick an option, but if you pick, between three options and it doesn't change anything, it's not a true choice, right? You're not actually choosing. But I think the power of AI is it lets you have a world that actually dynamically reacts to you, right? So like in the guard example I just shared, the guards walk past, and in that story, I was like, I got to choose not to involve myself in the brawl between the ship captain and the thugs, but I was like, I was the witness to this crime. What if I come forward as a witness? So I was able to go and be like, hey, I was the witness to this crime. And then the guards started interrogating me, and they didn't like what I said because their guard captain was buddies with the thug that got killed. So they started trying to like pressure me to like give up, to like change my story. They brought me to the guard house. They started beating me up and torturing me. And eventually the magistrate burst in and was like, saved me from their like illegal, interrogation. But it was so cool that I got to choose. I got to choose what my character did and what story I went down. And that was not what any developer had pre-made. So I think there's this creative choice that other things don't have, where you get to choose who you are. You get to choose what you do. You get to have a world that dynamically reacts to your choices, making them matter. And we even step another level above it, which, you can even choose what world you want to create, right? Like, you don't have to just play the single AAA, big RPG world. Like, you can create your own world. If you want a world that has this, has like cyberpunk vampires, it's like awesome. Go create the cyberpunk vampire world, and you can share that with others. And so that creative freedom to be anyone in any world and do anything is something that I think is really powerful, that even though we're still early on, like we'll get to, long term, we'll get to the big budget 3D version as we nail story and then get visuals. But I think a big reason why people play AI Dungeon or will play Voyage over other experiences, because they get to choose the story and their actions. They don't just follow a railroaded path that someone else gave.
Yeah, I mean, another one I'll add to this list is that anyone can create. And I think we take it for granted how easy it is to create on AI Dungeon, and it's going to be even more easy to create with Voyage, right? So like when Apple came out with the iPhone and the App Store was introduced for the first time, I mean, people talked about how like anyone can make an app and anyone can distribute it, um, or even when the web came out, anyone can make a website. But man, how hard is it to actually make those things, right? Like, and I've like as a little side thing, I've been attempting to make my first app for the App Store and Android store, and like, oh my gosh, you got to upload your passport and you got to get your identity verified, and there's all these checks. Like it takes so much time just to even get onto the platform, let alone understanding the code. I mean, Roblox I think is another place where you can create, but even there's a significant barrier to entry where it's like you have to learn this Luau programming language. You have to kind of understand all the ways that Roblox works. But with AI Dungeon, you could just get in and start writing, and people are building all these worlds through story cards and prompts and these multiple choice things, and like there's all this flexibility. And with Voyage, it's even easier to create, which is ironic because the Voyage worlds are actually more expansive. I mean, Nick, you talked about like there's character objects and location objects, and there's these different mechanics you can do it. And initially that can be a little bit overwhelming. I would say that like myself, I'm not the most kind of creative writer, but when I created my first world on Voyage, there's a tool in there that you can just use AI to create with, and I basically put in this prompt that said I want to have like this 1800s fishing village Jules Verne style adventure story, and there's got to be a sea monster that's kind of interfering with the ocean faring lifestyle that this town has. And that was basically all I gave it. And the AI went and built this whole world, and it dropped me into it, and it was exactly what I wanted. Like it had just the right theme and mood and tone and characters, but it also had things that wouldn't have even imagined, but I felt like I was part of this creation process because like it defined like these different sects. Like there was like a religious group that was seeing increased attendance at the church because people were afraid of the sea monster, and there was this like town commission that was trying to find alternative trade routes, and there was this like group of sea captains that was getting together, and they were trying to put this like mission together to go out and find the sea monster and get some data and kind of have this like whole reconnaissance mission. And like from that simple prompt, you get dropped in, and like it felt like a real place with all these different people with these different goals and initiatives and motivations. And it was something that I, as kind of as admittedly not the greatest world designer, world creator, was able to do immediately. And I think that ability for anybody to create and do it in a way that means something to, like, it meant something to me, and anybody could do that. And I think that's another important part of this creative freedom, is that anyone can be able to create on Voyage and AI Dungeon.
And to Leah's point, one thing we really try to target is a low creation floor, so low barrier to entry. So it's easy for anyone to create something in a simple way if they want. Like Devin was able to drop in, write a little prompt, and have his world. But also we want to have a high creation ceiling, which means that like if you want to invest the time, you can create increasingly interesting and complex things, and there's not really a like cap to how interesting you can make it. And so we really try, that's our objective, is to make it really easy to jump in, but also really powerful in terms of being able to make really cool things.
Yeah. And well, that's a good point, because we have a lot of creators that spend a lot of time on AI Dungeon creating, so it's important to have a really high cap. I think about the floor, because that's kind of where I play. I'm more of the creative floor level kind.
Fair enough.
Anything else that we want to talk about on creative freedom, or should we move on to the next one?
Let's move on to the next one.
Okay. Roll it out.
The last principle we have is community and connection. So for community and connection, I think there's a couple pieces of it, and this will be something that will become more pronounced over time, but we have the elements of in AI Dungeon as well, which is, we think that the most fun is not when you're only like isolated with your own ideas and your own creation, and that's all. the most fun is when you're part of a community who's exploring different ideas, right? You're able to, whether you're a player or creator, you're able to see the amazing things a community is making and be part of a community conversation. Or if you're a creator, you'll be able to create amazing things and see other people interact with that. Because I think, as a company, we really think of ourselves as just stewards of a bigger community, right? Like we are one piece of this broader community of AI Dungeon Voyage of people who are excited about these pillars, right? Like the broader community, even if we haven't had language, I think the community has always cared about these things, right? Our community has always cared about story immersion and creative freedom and creating as a community. And so we are ourselves stewards of this broader community that cares about these values. And we want to see the community like all move together to be more and more successful over time, to grow, to have better experiences, to create cooler creations. And I think there's a lot of value in being able to play as creation. So I think that's something a couple people have mentioned is, a lot of time creation can be its own form of play too. And so there's two pieces to this. One is the community of like the creation community. The other piece is multiplayer. So AI Dungeon has multiplayer, and we have done some on multiplayer. And I think that's really authentic to D&D, and to some experiences we're inspired by that ability to create interesting stories together. In Voyage, we take a much like stronger step towards really compelling multiplayer. So I would say in AI Dungeon, multiplayer is there. It's kind of like a side extra feature, but in Voyage, multiplayer is built for it from the get-go so that you can have really fun experiences where you jump into worlds with your friends, you go on crazy adventures, you create stories together. And I think it becomes way more compelling, and you can create way more interesting stories together with that.
Yeah, and I think it would also be fair for some of our players to maybe feel like this third pillar is one that we have the most opportunity to improve. I mean, to your point on multiplayer for AI Dungeon, it hasn't always been the kind of the central way to play AI Dungeon for a variety of reasons. It's a little bit hard to, in AI Dungeon, it's essentially kind of like this sort of like co-authoring experience with AI, and it's a little bit hard to have friends kind of contribute and join into that. But with Voyage, it's actually more fun in multiplayer, in my opinion, and it's kind of multiplayer as like a is sort of even like the preferred way of doing things. And then on top of that, we're going to have all of the same things that we have on AI Dungeon with the platform, with user generated content people can publish and share and discover. But we're going to lean further and further into this ability for people to find friends, make friends, play with friends, discover new subjects or topics or things that they care about that help them to have a more fun experience on Voyage. And I think that's something that for me is really exciting, that we can lean further and further into this. The other aspect that we talk about with this one as well is connection, and in some ways we covered this a little bit in the first pillar with storytelling, but another aspect of community and connection is actually the connection we have with characters. Like in some ways, like there'll probably be a time where like the line between there is like we don't want to like only think about multiplayer, but also like the depth of connection you can have with these AI companions that you're going on these adventures with as well. Nick, I'd be kind of curious to hear your thoughts on, like, it's interesting because like in some ways like Voyage and AI Dungeon are interesting because like if you think about a lot of the AI products out there, people have kind of complaining that, maybe not complaining, but critiquing that AI sort of is taking people away from other people, is taking people out of social situations. With Voyage, AI is going to be used to bring people together, but it's still also going to have this dimension of like connection with AI characters. And I'm curious, like, how do you think about that world where you're interacting with other people and friends, but also kind of like these characters that are being built and developed as part of these worlds that you're living in?
Yeah, I think, connecting with characters in movies and games and in books, like that emotional connection you have has always been part of immersing yourself in a world, right? In feeling this like connection to this character that you love, whether that's in a popular IP or in a book you love. And so I think with Voyage, we amplify that. And so the combination, that's one of the cool things is like the three pillars all connect to each other in ways that strengthen each other, right? So the connection you have with characters in these worlds and stories make the world feel more immersive and makes the connection more meaningful. And at the same time, the way that you can connect with other players and your creative freedom, your creativity interact with players can all result in a more immersive story. And so they all sort of like feed into each other to, I think, make it a much more compelling experience.
Yeah, I agree. Um, well, and maybe this is a good time to just kind of zoom out and review all of the pillars again, especially for those who joined late. But um, so kind of summarizing the pillars for AI Dungeon and Voyage. This is starts with immersive story and helping people to really kind of really inhabit these worlds and these adventures and these narratives and discover rich characters that sort of allow these emergent stories to unfold in front of them. Creative freedom, allowing people to build their own worlds and define their path. And unlike traditional games that sort of force you down one direction or another, you can really choose your own kind of story, your own adventure, and it can be anything that you want it to be. But also the choices have real meaning and consequence that they can um, have weight to them, which is kind of funny because we kind of joke that it's like one of the most exciting things about Voyage is like your choices have consequences, and it feels like such a funny thing to say out loud, but it has such a meaningful impact on the creative freedom and also the kind of satisfaction that you get from the creation. And then finally, the community and connection through multiplayer, through social, through publishing content and discovering our great content. You know, that becomes like a strong third pillar that we're able to bring in for both AI Dungeon and Voyage. And so, these are the three product pillars that we are thinking a lot about for all of the stuff that we work on, whether it's Latitude, or sorry, for AI Dungeon or Voyage. This really does apply well to all of them. Um, Nick, I'm curious if you have any kind of final thoughts on like any sort of now that we've kind of, I think one thing that's interesting is like now that we've been living with these pillars for a little while, like it's interesting because like we haven't always had these pillars defined, right? And it's often helpful to kind of spell them out, write them down, socialize them, talk about them as a team, and now obviously talk about them as a community. Um, because I think it helps us to kind of focus our thinking. And you talked about kind of long-term strategy, um, and how it kind of helps us think about where we want to build in the future. But I'd be kind of curious your thoughts, like as we've had time to kind of live with these pillars for a little bit, at least the written form of them, obviously. How has it kind of changed your thinking about a Dungeon and Voyage? How does it change how you're thinking about like where things go? Not only just for the Voyage launch, but even into the future. Like how do these pillars kind of change the way that you think about where we're going as a company?
I think what it does is it really helps us make sure that we're focusing on the right things and the things that really really deliver value. Because it's easy to, come up with lots of different ideas of things and be like, well, what if we did this and this and this? And I think the way to create the best experience for users is to not necessarily do 100 different things of all various kinds, but to really understand what matters to people, and how do we focus and spend all our time on the things that really matter to players. Because like I think if we can just do those things really really well, then people will have a great experience. And so I think that helps us focus in on the things that will drive more immersive story. AI Dungeon right now, it's memory. Like we see that continually. It's memory and bugs. Like we want to minimize bugs. We want to maximize how well the AI remembers. and that will deliver better story, right? We're seeing similar on Voyage right now. We're doing a production pass and making it just more polished. And over time, we'll be pushing on these different levers. We'll make it easier for creators to create, giving more creative freedom. We'll give more, community and connection in terms of ways to jump into multiplayer or create with your friends, etc. And over the long run, we'll probably make Voyage more immersive with, visual systems as well. Like maybe at some point we'll go to the 3D version of Voyage, right? Like that's still a little far off in terms of the technology, but at some point we'll get to that, right? And that will be a way to give you deeper immersion in a world. And so I think it makes it really easy for us to be clear on what is going to drive value and how do we do that and what do we focus on, um, and help us prioritize the things that our players care most about.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and I'm glad as well that we're sharing this with our community now, because I mean, to your point around um, all of the different things that we could build that we're saying no to potentially, right? As we think about the feedback that we get from players and the feature requests, like I think this is something that now the community can also kind of help us pay attention to and say, is this a feature that would help us to have more immersive story, or is this something that will help us to have greater kind of community connection or expand our creative freedom? And I think as the community pays attention to these pillars as well, I think it's going to help them to refine their own suggestions and thinking and help frame them in the context of this stuff. Because like a lot of our best insights and input on like where we go and what we build for AI Dungeon has come from the community. And it's been interesting seeing some of the comments as we've been talking about this today. People, kind of these, I think many of these pillars are resonating. I think there's a lot of people who have certainly felt the immersive story side of things. People have talked about, the creative freedom being a big part of why they are here. And so, I think this also helps us to have kind of greater feedback with the community as we're thinking through, feature requests and things like that. Well, great. Really appreciate everyone joining today. Nick, any final thoughts on product pillars or anything else that's on your mind that you want to share?
Um, no, I'm just excited to keep making, the experience better, and we want to do our best. At the end of the day, like the main thing we want to focus on as a company is how do we deliver the best experience we can to users. And we just trust that if we do that, the business results, the revenue, like everything else will take care of itself if we just deliver the best experience and the most value we can to players. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on. And these are the pillars that we are going to be operating on for how to do that. We're going to be working on how to make the story more immersive and reduce the times that you get pulled out of immersion. We're going to try and make sure you have the creative freedom and the ability to guide the AI in the direction you want. And we're going to be working on, growing the community and connection. And I think my final point would be, this isn't just this isn't just about us. This is about our whole community working together to make all these values more real for all of us. And so that's something that we really appreciate all the contributions that people in the community make. We have people who contribute in so many different ways. You have people who are helping out in the Discord and helping new players. We have people who are scenario creators, right? We have people who are creating mods that, help many scenarios get better, right? With Leah and auto cards and there's so many ways to help in the community. Giving feedback is another way. And so I think that's what I want to say at the end is just thank all of you for helping, the community build a better experience. You are all part of this journey in making this like vision of the future like come into reality. And then just a request to keep helping, keep finding ways to contribute and ways to help the community be better and sharing your feedback. We love all the feedback. It's a gift that helps us, know how to improve the experience. And appreciate all of you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree. We've had a lot of great feedback, and Really appreciate everyone that's joining us on these live streams. It's given us a chance to connect with you and listen to you and hear your feedback. I hope I don't get in trouble. I am known on occasion for being a little bit of I tend to have leaks, especially later in the evening. My inhibitions are low, and since people have joined the live stream, maybe we'd give them a little bit of a leak to look forward to. And so just want to throw out there that you may want to pay attention later this week, maybe sometime around the Thursday date. There could be something interesting for you to you may find something interesting under your Christmas tree if you do Christmas trees or whatever it is. Is that a fair? Is that too far, Nick?
That is fair. I will say it's not Voyage. We're not there yet, but there might be some fun things.
Some AI Dungeon surprises then.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a leak. Okay. Well, we appreciate you all joining in, and we do have another live stream scheduled for Thursday. The subject may or may not be related to this possible surprise that may or may not happen on Thursday. So we'll look forward to talking to you all on Thursday, and appreciate you all joining. We'll talk to you all later. See ya.